Okay, so hi Raja. Thank you for
Hello.
being here today.
You're welcome.
Just want to tell people that were watching that you were my senior teacher in somatic experiencing for a short amount of time. And I'd like to introduce you by reading your bio. So Raja Selvam, Ph.D., is a clinical psychologist and the developer of Integral Somatic Psychology, or ISP for short, which is an advanced approach for integrating body, energy, and consciousness into psychological processes in all therapeutic modalities. And Raja, your eclectic approach draws from the bodywork systems of postural integration, biodynamic cranio-sacral therapy, polarity therapy, body psychotherapy systems, Reichian therapy, bioenergetics, biodynamic analysis, quite a lot of integration, Jungian and Archetypal psychologies, psychoanalytic schools of object relations and inter-subjectivity, and somatic experiencing, affective neuroscience, quantum physics, yoga, and Advaita Vedanta. You're also a senior trainer in Peter Levine's Somatic Experiencing Professional Trauma Training Program and a former member of the board of the Foundation for Human Enrichment, FHE, also known as the Somatic Experiencing Trauma Institute, SETI. And you teach integral somatic psychology and somatic experiencing all over the world. So did I miss anything?
No, I
No.
think, yeah.
So one of the reasons we're here together is that I've never forgotten a demo you did in my senior class. It was with a man who was going through a Kundalini experience, and he was having a lot of energetic, intense symptoms in his body. And in the demo, you helped him expand the energy in his body. And as I watched him, everything kind of calmed down and he had less fear about what was happening. And he was able to start to integrate the energetic symptoms that he was experiencing. And the people that will be watching this video and taking my course are also having these kinds of intense energy experiences. So the questions I'll ask you today are geared towards helping them manage their symptoms, but yet at the same time, we don't want to stop the force of Kundalini, which is the force of awakening. And the aim of which is to have a subtle body and a physical body that's actually a stable container for self-realization and for divine consciousness. So I recently took one of your courses online, which was the peri and prenatal trauma course. And I found that many of the things you were mentioning would be appropriate to help people in this course. So one of the first things I noticed is you said that mainstream psychology doesn't recognize the importance of the subtle body and the energy body. And I have also found this to be true in many of the current non-dual teachings that are going around, especially California, but going around the world today. They don't include knowledge of the subtle body. And that therefore, integration of these symptoms is often completely ignored. So one of the first questions I have for you is, as a clinical psychologist, how did you start to recognize the importance of the energy body, the subtle body, in your work with your clients?
It goes back to my growing up in India, that the subtle body, uh, the soul in religions is always a part of Indian, spirituality and mythology. Yeah, it has always been there. In Vedanta, there is no distinction really made between one body and the other. In Vedanta, there are 5 layers, right? The 5 layers. You have the Annamaya Kosha, the body of food that is, maintained by food and water. Yeah. the body that goes into the coffin, right? This body exists at the level where we can measure it and weigh it and so on, as a bone or neurons or even atoms and molecules and so on. These are all considered big enough components of this body that goes eventually into a coffin or cremated. Yeah, it's made up of big enough components for human observation and instrumentation, right? That's why it's called the gross body. But this very body, we also know, if you keep breaking it down, becomes what? Beyond the atom, you have subatomic particles, neutrons, protons, electrons. If you break them down in superconducting supercolliders, in quantum physics experiments, we have what are called quarks, tiny particles called, of matter called fermions, and tiny energy particles called bosons. And so this body, it looks right, solid, etc. But if you keep breaking it down, everything that's solid in me, water molecule or iron molecule, etc., eventually breaks down into these fragments, tiny fragments that obey not the laws of Newtonian physics, but the laws of quantum mechanics.
Right.
So this body exists on both levels. So do I call this a subtle body or a gross body? It's only called a gross body because it aggregates up to pieces that can be measured. But otherwise, it's also subtle. Subtle means, I think, from the modern scientific point of view, we can say quantum level phenomena, right? So in Vedanta, you have the Annamaya Kosha as one layer of the individual. Jiva is an individual, one layer of it, right? And then the second layer, you have 5 other layers, right? You have the Prana Maya Kosha, the body of energy, right? And then you have the Manomaya Kosha, the mind, thoughts, feelings, behavioral tendencies, and then Vijnanamaya Kosha, the intellect or the I sense, right? And then the causal body is called Anandamaya Kosha. So there's really no distinction between, and then the Annamaya Kosha, the body of food maintained by food, is called, it's called the gross body. But then every other level of this body, the 4 other levels, don't really belong to this body.
Mm-hmm.
Because this body, the gross body, also has a gross level and a subtle level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I confusing or
No,
clear enough?
No, yeah. This is very clear.
Then the soul consists of all these other levels. So there's no distinction really made, And then the question is, how does we work with the subtle body? Because the subtle body separates from the gross body. The subtle body only exists at the quantum level. The gross body, the coffin body, I call it, exists at the subtle level as well as the gross level. So where do they interact? They interact with each other at the subtle level.
Right.
So, but they're in separate bodies. Yeah, because one body, decays according to the laws of nature at the end of one's life. The other body sheds some layers and goes on. But you see it also in theosophy, right? So the question is, how do we work with that body? Because that body carries over all these tendencies from one life to the next.
Exactly.
Right? And that informs the psychology of the individual in the present, as you can see from the differences among children, right? Difference among children in the same household, the difference among twins,
yep,
from the same womb, exposed to the same environment. So this is the subject of sometimes, past life psychology and so on. Yeah. Reincarnation and so on. And there's a lot of scientific evidence for it. At the University of Virginia, they have Reincarnation Research Center, they have over 3,000 children who spontaneously recall their prior lives, immediate prior lives that could be, validated by, rigorous scientific methods. So it's a different body. It's a different body. It's a body. It is the body that experiences everything, right? When it, one way or the other, when it's attached to the gross body, the coffin body, it experiences it through that. When it's not attached, it still has an experience. And you can see it in research on near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. There is still a body. It's still limited.
I had a near-death experience, so I'm personally very aware, and I'm on the board of IANS in Santa Barbara, the International Association for Near-Death Experiences.
Yeah, so you know that you have a body. You know that you have an individuality. You know that you have thoughts, feelings, everything, even movement, except that you can't be operating the body on the table, wherever it is, presumed to be dead for the moment. You cannot operate that. You know that. I don't have to tell you that. But
awareness and consciousness continue.
Yeah, they continue.
Yeah.
Awareness continue. And so the question, how does one work with that? How does one work with that? There are so many different models of how to work with the subtle body. One method is to, they have chakras.
I do.
They have nadis.
Yes.
And so on. The different structures, right? Different energy patterns and so on. Different cultures have different models, but the chakra model seems to be quite common. Some aspect of the chakra model seems to be quite common. This body gets affected. This body is carrying on different things, limitations, and those limitations become the limitations of the gross body that we have. And the gross body is taken on in each life in order to transform the imperfections, in the gross body. Like I often liken it to my grandfather was a goldsmith, and he had other goldsmiths working for him. And I used to watch in their shop how they would melt old golden ornaments. Right, this earth element, it can withstand temperatures up to many degrees, and it will be glowing red in the fire, and inside you have the gold that's melting, right? But it's a tough thing. You have to have that kind of earth container to melt the old golden ornament, so it can be melted and then recast into a new model. And that's exactly what the gross body does in each life. The body that and so we do need to do a lot of work here. One of the primary principles or requirements for enlightenment, whatever that is, we'll come to it later. I'm sure that you have questions about that, but I'll tell you my understanding of it, is that we need to form a greater capacity for opposites. You see it in. So that's one of the primary, and my thinking has been that it could be done through, it is meant to be done through this body, so you can't just go away from it. You have to find life experiences to create this capacity, and then when we do, what happens is that awareness, identifies with this body, right? That's the universal problem, right? Or opportunity, whatever you can call it. It's very difficult to separate one's awareness from this body if the body doesn't have a great capacity for opposites, life experiences. It's the difference between, traveling a stormy sea in a pretty solid boat and then a leaky boat, or, a small boat. I think that's the difference. And so in order to do that, when we have had traumas, difficult experiences from this life or prior life, we form defenses, not only in this body, like in terms of constriction of the muscle, etc., but also in the energy body in terms of patterns of energy that limit its expansion, right? And I think I'm answering more than your question. So the Kundalini practices are beyond that. There is a connection. The individual body consisting of a subtle body and a gross body, the jiva, the individual, right? It can become constricted or inhibited, right? And even though it depends miserably on the collective body, right? It also fights it at the same time, right? And then the Kundalini practices, they are, working with the third eye and the crown has the effect of, increasing the connectivity between the individual and the collective, right? There are people who have just meditated on the third eye or the crown, and they've also gone on to achieve, spiritual growth all the way toward enlightenment, right? Now, the Kundalini practice is another way of doing it, right? Where, you're connecting the collective to the individual in a different set of practices. And it's great that we have all these different ways of reaching the same goal, right? Different people find, different paths. And so I can imagine that when we do that, I mean, this also happens, you work with the third eye, the crown, and the energy comes in and things happen. That might set off the Kundalini process too.
It might, but could I just say something that my own experience was quite different, that I was not just working with third eye or crown. Yeah. I had very specific body-oriented practices that helped renovate the system from the bottom up in a sense. So it's very common, I think, for what is known as, quote, Kundalini yoga today, mainly taught by the previous Yogi Bhajan, to rev up the system with pranayama practices that are often too much for the subtle body or too much for a particular practitioner. So maybe they're focusing here quite prematurely and the lower bodies are not grounded enough. So one of my passions right now is helping people open up the lower body and other, and I know it's one of yours, because sometimes these transcendent practices are premature and not the right practice for the person's level of awareness.
Yeah. The problem with that, Dani, is that we don't know the soul, we don't know where the soul is at and what the soul needs in one life. And so there are in my view, there are many different paths. And, I think the Kundalini path also has many variations, right?
Many variations. And
many variations. Just like that, there are many other paths, no? Like there are people who I'll give you an example. I mean, it's often, shared as a story. Some people can become enlightened by just hearing the truth.
Yeah.
And they can go crazy,
right?
Psychotic from just hearing the truth. That happens in, spiritual workshops that have nothing to do with working with the body, So different souls, I guess, this is way too complex for us, But what I'm interested in, what is common is that no matter what path you take, that's what you're interested in. You're interested in a particular form of Kundalini practice, which personally has been effective. So, it's not that you're talking about it theoretically. You know that through your own soul, through its own growth.
And
right?
I've explored other paths too, right? So I'm not negating any of these other paths. Buddhism has its own lineage and practice, and Judaism has its own lineage and practice.
So in all practices,
right,
I think we run into this problem. Is there enough of a container of the limited bodies, the gross body or the subtle body, to withstand the heat without fragmenting, without going crazy? That is what we are interested in, right? That is that's where our interests coincide, right?
So. Yes. And also with the opposites, which I was going to ask you about later, but one thing that I was both tickled and surprised at, when I came to somatic experiencing, I had studied the Jewish path of Kabbalah for many years. And the tree of life has two complementary side columns and a middle balancing column. And I was quite tickled to discover somatic experiencing kind of uses a pendulated motion between complementary or opposing conditions, beliefs, feelings, sensations. It was so identical to my Kabbalistic healing studies. So I was thrilled. And in the Kabbalah, when they talk about opposites or complementary pairs, they say that when you can hold a pair of complementary qualities in your body together at the same time, a third thing that's greater than either side actually descends, a third spaciousness, a third quality that we perhaps can't even name, but it's greater than the sum of its parts. And
this is also very Jungian.
Very Jungian. Jung was studying Kabbalah also, I believe.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about trauma and expanding the body to contain opposites, I feel that it's one of the core principles that I've studied and has been very effective on all levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So.
And how do you use that in the embodiment work you're doing currently?
Well, people have the experiences all the time of not being able to tolerate their life experience, right? I mean, the individual body is incredibly versatile, but also limited, right? And we are more resistant because of survival reasons toward unpleasant experiences.
Right.
See, unpleasant experiences are states of stress or dysregulation. Yeah, by definition, they are. Otherwise, why would it be unpleasant? Right? Things have to become dysregulated or stressful in the body for it to be painful, and all unpleasant emotions have that in common. They're painful to a greater or lesser degree.
And we'd like to avoid them, right? We'd like to avoid them.
Yeah, the brain is designed to do that. Mm-hmm. So, and the brain is designed to do that. And then since we don't have control over our brains, when is the last time anybody could say, I have control over my next thought? So these are built in. Therefore, there's an innate resistance toward unpleasant experience, period. That is true for me, that's true for everybody, till we die, right? That is actually true also in the subtle body, mm-hmm. Not just in the body. In this body, it feels pretty, in this body, experiences become more intense. And therefore, people, try to kill themselves, to avoid feeling the pain in this body. But poor body is designed to survive against all odds, and therefore it has all these defenses, right, to not feel unpleasant things, and so we have all kinds of, why do people come to therapy? Because it feels bad enough that they want to give a stranger money, and have, and be shrunk, so to speak, to use the old word shrink. Why? Because it feels bad enough. Where? In the physiology. Is it here? No, it's in the body. So we have to develop a greater capacity for that. And how do you do that? There are so many ways to do that, right? One of the things I've learned in psychology or spirituality is there's no one way to do anything. Mm-hmm. And in fact, that's a pretty darn good thing. Imagine imagine just having one exercise at the gym, it doesn't work, right? So different people, different natures, different backgrounds, different histories through different stages of soul development, they need different things. So what is common is that they don't like to feel things unpleasant. in the body. So how
And
do
your
you
job
create
is to help them do that, yes?
And the thing is that more than anything else, there are two things that give us that capacity. The one thing is, how do I regard suffering? My attitude. Do I think that's necessary to heal? To not just to heal my broken heart. It doesn't have to be for enlightenment, right? The other is, do I have enough support from another person?
Mm-hmm.
Because my body is limited. The more bodies I can depend on, the easier it is for me to develop a capacity for suffering in my body. It's like at least they're holding me up so that I can learn to walk, and then at least I can learn to walk and guide other people to walk like you're doing, right? So those two things are very important. But over and above that, there are many psychotherapists, psychoanalysts who do these two very well, But what they don't do very well, as you said, they don't pay attention to the body
Mm-hmm.
and the role it can play. And that is where I come in, and I say, not just me, I'm sure that there are many people, including you, they say, how do we use better use of this body to develop that capacity? The body with a brain that avoids suffering like like a toothache, and so take an experience, right? What I do is very simple, and anybody can do it actually, because everybody has difficult experiences. No? It doesn't take that long to get to one. It's there every day, right?
Right.
And to a greater or lesser degree. So take the situation, step one, and then get support or support it to feel it, right? And then the third step, expand it in the body, because if you don't expand it in the body, there are two types of defenses, right? Here, the defenses of the gross body, like constriction of the muscle and inhibition of movement, then defenses of the subtle body, in terms of how the energy concentrates in one place, depletes in another place. That makes a difficult experience even more difficult to experience. So that's the key basic idea. And so I often use an example of how, to clients or students. I say, is it easier to lift a 50-kilogram bag with one arm or both arms? They say, both arms, of course. I say, so what happens when you lift a 50-kilogram bag with both arms? The overall stress on my body is less, right? But also the stress in both arms is less than when I just try to lift it with one arm.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same idea. An emotion is the impact of a situation on your physiology, brain and body physiology. If you can distribute it, guess what? You're actually going to be experiencing it, even a higher level of it. In fact, if you have a 100-kilogram bag with both arms, you might actually experience less stress, in one part of the body or throughout the body when you lift a 50-kilogram bag. That's the capacity, that using the whole body gives you. So and so that's the basic simple idea. Then I started to use it, and it works, and then I started to look for the science of it.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately in the last 20 years or so, the science of embodied cognition and emotion give us the very findings we need. Why, when we do that, expand the experience of the emotion, difficult emotion, throughout the body? Because the pleasant emotions are pushed away. Why? Because of unpleasant emotional consequences. Because there's nothing innately, we don't innately push something and a pleasant experience away. We push it away because there are some unpleasant emotional consequences, right? So it comes down to unpleasant emotional consequences. So if you lift it, then when you work with the defenses, you can work with the gross body. There are so many different bodywork systems, but sooner or later, sometimes you cannot do it as well, or you cannot do it as efficiently. I'll give you an example. No? I worked with a woman whose father survived World War II, right? His family was wiped out and in Sweden. And after the war, he found someone else, a woman, Jewish woman, whose family had also been wiped out by the Holocaust. And they got married and they had this lovely child. I think they had two children, I forget. But this daughter is the one I treated in the class. And the father went to Israel and then was there, came back disillusioned somehow. And he couldn't bear life and he killed himself, hung himself to death. And this student of mine lives in a European country, and she said she still does not dare to let other people know that she's Jewish.
Oh.
Right? And her symptom was the following, that she's afraid of groups. That doesn't surprise you, does it?
No.
So we worked with the group. We worked with the terror, existential terror. I just had a look at the group and have a sense the terror in the body, right? Which is the fear of dying, fear of annihilation. And then we distributed it, So, and she had a neck, by the way, she had a neck symptom too.
Of course, right.
And so we worked with it and she had a good experience. In fact, she wrote to me and said, at the end of the session, she said, oh, that was very hard for people. Because nobody likes to resonate with the fear of dying, right? And it's the very thing that the body is trying, body and the brain are trying to avoid at all costs. And she said, but she said she feels closer.
Mm-hmm.
And she feels somehow more energy in her body. She feels more embodied, right? What that means to me is that the defenses in the subtle body against the collective are lessened. So more energy can come to from the collective to the individual body, fill up the subtle body, and in turn, fill up the gross body. That's just, it's a very simplistic way of looking at it.
Could I just make one comment? Because a lot of people think when they've experienced collective trauma that it's too much, too big, and they get very, very shut down because of the overwhelm. And what I've seen you do is you just work with what is present and the fear that's present in the person. And that's enough to shift the relationship with the collective, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Ultimately, what is the fear? The fear is one of individual integration, right?
Right.
That's where the most resistance is. So what happens? Next day, I develop a neck pain.
Oh.
That's not unusual, by the way. When I work with somebody in the resonance that is resonating with the other person's experience, I resonate with the unconscious as well as conscious. I resonate with the energy flow as well as the energy fixations. Usually at night through my dreams, etc., it works its way through, or I'll do yoga, or I'll get body work, or I have therapy every week. I'm a Jungian analyst, who does not know much about the body, but he stays with me when I work with my own body, right?
Yeah.
So, but guess what? No. And then I went through this process of the fear of dying because I nearly died in my birth, as you know, and I worked through the terror. The pain kept coming back, right? And I had body work, people working on me, etc. And I would have the emotional experience, but it did continue to do that. And then we went to India. And my wife said, and by now I'm thinking I've damaged my neck through yoga. Because this is how we interpret, what we do interpret it. Yeah, we don't know. So therefore we make it medical, right? So I even, went to a medical doctor and he didn't know what it was. And he suggested physiotherapy, but I had already done all that, osteopathy and so on. So my wife said, why don't you call Ramachandran the healer? So this guy, Ramachandran the healer, is a guy who taught himself energy work. And I could see that he's a schizoid structure, right? He was barely in his body, and he didn't like, he was not comfortable around people. He went into the forest and learned how to work with energy by working on plants and trees, right? And very distracted guy. And we called him, and because we've had good results with him. My brother, he couldn't walk for several weeks. The pain was so excruciating. They were about to schedule surgery, and he comes, and he just, his touch is very butterfly-like,
Ethereal.
Yeah, exactly. And then my brother's walking, and he goes down to a store. He's a jeweler in my family tradition, and he has no pain. So we've heard that kind of thing. So we had him come, and he just, with my neck and a little bit here, a little bit, I could feel things release. And that night, I was so terrified. I had so much terror that I've not experienced before, that I kept distributing, because I knew that I needed to do that. And then the next day, the pain was gone. It hasn't come back. And so that told me that I'd known this, there are things that you can work with the subtle body directly. Sometimes the most efficient thing is to work with the subtle body. If you're working with the gross body because the two are tied together, of course it has an effect on the subtle. If you work with the subtle, it has an effect on the gross. We know all that from the quantum physics theories, that evidence and so on. So, but can you work, the energy healers work directly on the subtle body, right?
Exactly.
And so there are some energy workers who work especially on the individual subtle body.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Right? The Reiki masters, what do? They connect the collective to the individual body. And they also do miraculous things, right? And acupuncturists and acupressure people, especially from China, who are afraid that they would be, perhaps some time ago, they thought it would be a good thing to talk about an individual energy, body, and soul for religious purposes, right? They just bypass the subtle body and then work with this body as though it's one composite body. And that also seems to work at times. But
because they're nested. They're nested. It's not one body. It is one body. I mean,
it is one body, but it's not. And then therefore differentiate it. In my view, if you can differentiate and get an advantage, why not get an advantage? And that's how I got into the studying the structure of the subtle body and how both subtle and gross individual bodies are related to the collective. This is how I think about it. And when I talk about the work with Kundalini, right? When I hear about Reiki, or when I hear about meditations based on the third, etc., they're very different approaches. They eventually end up challenging, right? The collective will challenge the individual, right? And the experiences come up. If we know enough of each structure, we might be able to offer better work, better help,
Right. Right.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. A woman came to me years ago when I had a practice in Los Angeles, and she had been in a Kundalini intensive, right? And she had an experience that most of us on this path would, pay $1 million to have. What did I experience? Let me explain. Experience. When I heard it, I just envied it. That it was intense Kundalini practice. She said, yoga, meditation. So essentially, she wakes up in the morning. She works as a tax auditor at an H&R Block. The problem, tax season, is that she can't get to work. You know why? She's everywhere. And she's at peace. Why should she go?
Right.
Right. Now, if she had been in India, that wouldn't have been a problem. She would have had people, could have become a spiritual teacher, right? But in San Francisco, right, she needed to get to work to pay her, rent. And So then that became a soul, that became a distress, because some of the individual bodies, subtle and gross, didn't have quite the capacity for such collective expansion. So with her, the work was to try to bring her awareness to the to the body, right? Bring the energy, her expansion into the skin. That brought up the terror.
Right.
Now the terror could be anything, right? It could be the terror of being nearly killed in the process of birth, or could be the terror that one inherited from the mother who went through the Holocaust, or it could be the proverbial terror of the ego, right? That's fragmenting upon contact with the light. So whatever it is, she needed to do this work. She needs to do that work, and who needs to do that work? We don't know. That's the problem. We don't know who comes into this life with more capacity.
But it shows up. And a couple of comments, just going back to your experience after you worked with that person. What I have found is the subtle body is like an onion, in that it contains these terrors to different degrees in different places in the subtle body. And either something from our outside life triggers its opening in our body, and we become aware of terror, we become aware of unexplainable feelings until we process them. Or we're triggered by the intensity, like your client, of a great expansion.
Right.
And then what I'm interested in is this integration process, this bringing in and integrating. And some people in the West think it should happen like this: one session with a therapist, and boom, you're integrated and ready to start teaching. First of all, I've seen you work for 1 hour with person, on a little piece of the terror, right? An hour just to get the body to start to accommodate the terror. So maybe you could give us all here a little bit of a adjustment of time and expectation to integrate these forces and experiences.
When people come to me, they're not all on the path of enlightenment, and it's a path that's seldom traveled, right? And one needs grace. The very idea of one needs to go on this path is a thought that is really happening in the brain, right? So there's no will there, right? So the people come to me because of very ordinary problems. The neck constriction, right? Or they come because they have a broken heart, right? Or they come because they have anxiety about the pandemic. Simple things, small problems they come to, or asthma, right? So this is what alchemists would call, literally shit, right? And how do you turn that into gold, right? So the people, by and large, most of the time, develop symptoms because they cannot handle the life experience, right? Affect intolerance is what leads to problems, right? This is the conventional wisdom in psychoanalysis, Jungian psychology, alchemy, and so on. So we are doing so we take a little bit of, we take them toward the emotion or emotions that are creating this constriction in the individual body, leading to the problem. And we're expanding the body, creating a greater capacity. How much do we need to do? We don't know, in order to resolve the symptom. I'll give you an example. There's a woman, I'm writing a book, and it's going to come out in November of 2021. And it's actually called what is it called? The practice of embodying emotion. Improving cognitive, behavioral, and emotional outcomes. That's what the thing. And in that book, there are 2 chapters very early on that are looking at one situation, one chapter. There are all these examples of huge processes, the fear of dying, for prolonged period of time, all over the body, deep into the central nervous system. That kind of, that the kind of session that will make a good movies, whereas there are these very boring, why did I choose this person to work with kind of sessions too? And they have sometimes equally impressive outcomes, and I didn't know this because I liked, I'm from India, I like Bollywood movies, so I like drama. But, when you have a person who has suffering from asthma, it's clear that she developed it after a breakup, right? She says, with someone I loved the most in my life, but I chose to break up with them, so why should I feel sadness? That kind of person. So it's like working to, spin a rope out of a rock, as we say in India. It's like pulling teeth, is the English expression. So a little bit of sadness in the eyes, a little bit of whining, a little bit of sadness here, just a little bit of bad feeling. And she says at the end, did we do any work at all? That was not bad, because the defenses were taking good care of her, and they were mocking me in the session at the end of the session. Did we really do anything? What kind of therapist are you? That kind of thing. So she didn't have an asthma attack after that.
Mm-hmm.
What happened? Because her limitation is so strong, the differences are so strong in the subtle and the gross bodies, that it's very difficult to get an emotion and embody it. But a little bit is, adequate. So what I'm saying is that we don't have to assume that it has to be necessarily that intense when we're working with ordinary problems, right? Now, when we are looking at, problems that are brought about by brought about by Kundalini arousal, another similar, these are people who are actually asking for a lot of trouble. They're challenging if you think about it, but then the bigger the risks people take, the bigger the rewards, right? So it's not to be discounted. So they're really serious. And one spiritual path or the other, they're challenging, differences, deeper in the subtle body, in between the subtle body and the collective body, all at once, right? So it makes sense that all their traumas, all their difficult experiences that led to the reinforcement of these differences are going to show up. It's like a nightmare on Elm Street, that kind of thing. So then we have to work with it. Fortunately, here's the thing. Even if multiple traumas are, stimulated, fortunately, there is something common to all of them, right? For example, we are terrified of all of them, right? So we have multiple heartbreaks. What is common? That pain in my heart. So you take one situation, right? Or even the situation that I'm terrified of losing my mind, and when I bring my energy back here, I'm terrified that I will disappear. You work with that emotion. You expand that to the extent necessary for the person to make the next step.
Making it very simple, very simple.
Very simple, really. Otherwise, we'll have to, how many lives do we have? How many lives have we had? We don't know, because the soul has no beginning, right? It has an end, but, it has no beginning, right? And therefore, how many lives has it been through? How many life impressions has it had? So we don't have that many. We want to solve it in one life, which means that there has to be something common that we have to hold on to, right? And so, and that's what I find. I think people tell me, even though spiritual practice is not my work, it's seldom the case that people come to me and say that, I fell in love and I had what they told me was a psychotic experience. But it turned out later on, I learned that it's actually a mystical experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I still suffer from it. So I
Mm-hmm.
said, okay, let's work with it, and what terror it brought up. And the same way somebody comes to me and say they went on an ayahuasca trip and they had the most wonderful experience. And then they fell into this terrible place where they have all kinds of neurological symptoms, right? Like Gopi Krishna, for example,
Right.
and I'm looking forward to reading your book, by the way, one of these days. I love personal stories, right?
Yeah.
And they make things real. And then I would go after what is terrifying about it, rather than chase the different ways in which the body could fragment. I would say fragmentation as an experience and the intolerability of it. And you work with that, hold it together like, 1,000 pieces, vegetables are cooking in a pot. Hold the pot and focus on how intolerable it is.
Uh-huh.
Right?
That's
And
what's unique to you, I think, right now, is that you're expanding that which is intolerable and helping people hold it, tolerate it. Even when they don't want to, you keep on encouraging them.
I know.
Right against their defense there.
And they say, and some of them, my students say, some of them, the common complaint I was that I don't want to torture my client. Then I said, you don't understand the, in nature of healing. People are suffering and they want you to make it short. And the best way to do that is to develop a capacity for the suffering, the legitimate suffering in the experience, so that they don't have to suffer unnecessarily for lives, from avoiding that suffering. So
right.
So.
You brought up an interesting thing about psychotic experiences. I'm personally not qualified to work with somebody with that presentation, so I usually refer. And then there's a psychotic-like experience that can happen through the experimentation with psychedelics, which I've seen a lot of. Yeah. I've personally come across people who have done way too much experimentation with psychedelics, and I have found that their subtle body is damaged. Yeah. And that damage does not repair very quickly, even with the energy healing. It takes a certain amount of time if it will recover.
Absolutely right. In fact, in Brazil, we have recommended some people, because, if you're, your subtle body suffers, takes on the brunt of your experience, right? And the more that this body cannot tolerate it, the more the suffering is transferred to the subtle body, right? And it can fragment. So what we often say is that then they don't do as much, or at least stop that for a while, till they develop a capacity for the experiences that came up that were intolerable. You're right. Yeah. So.
And they might need to take care of their food body, their gross body, their physical body, and give it proper nutrients and rest, so that the subtle body can repair itself.
If you want to put it on fire every day to transform your subtle body, you need to take good care of it, right? So.
Of your physical body.
Right.
Do you ever recommend medication to people at this point in time?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah. The question is, if it helps you to develop a greater capacity, yes. It doesn't matter whether it's a plant that you chew in a forest or whether it's a chemical it's made in the laboratory. No, it doesn't matter. So as long as the individual is maturing,
the individual
is maturing in their capacity for life. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Sometimes the fragmentation of the physical body and the subtle body are so great that one needs, medication. Absolutely. If it were not meant to be, it would not be there in the natural order of things, right? We have evolved to have that. And absolutely. Yeah, so.
That's a great answer. Somehow we've covered most of my questions just by chatting, which is great. It being in the flow. I'm just seeing if there's anything else. I think the only other thing, no, I think we pretty much covered all my questions.
Okay.
With your permission, of course, I would like to teach a couple of the embodiment exercises that I have learned from you
Please,
and
please.
help
Yeah,
people use them in my group and
absolutely. Yeah,
learn
please,
how to
please.
track their
Yeah,
own sensations.
yeah. The book itself, one of the things, um, the book itself is meant not just for psychotherapists. The people who come to you, for example, are looking for something more than therapy. They're going after the big prize,
Hmm.
and they want to learn self help, and so it's also aimed at them, right? And you will have enough you know enough material for people to start applying things to themselves, especially after the pandemic, right? We don't have, many countries or even the US, we don't have the enough people to tend to the psychological and spiritual needs of people, right? and
People who
and
are
therefore,
stressed. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, by all means, teach them, and there's also, I don't know if you know, there's a set of embodiment exercises on my
I have
website.
them. Yes,
You
I have
have them.
them.
Please teach them. That's
Yeah.
the way to do it. The only thing I would be careful about, because you learned somatic experiencing from me, as well as, you know you've seen ISP, right? There is a uh, tracking body sensations as a tool was not there in body psychotherapy about 20 years ago. It's a
It was new.
relatively new phenomenon, maybe 30 years, right? It's a wonderful tool, but it can also be a tool that can become a defense.
Hmm.
Like, everything can become a defense, right? Right. So if you say, touch your chest, if you have fear there, to help the fear to expand, you can say the intention, and the electromagnetic intention will be that, right, to support it. But very often, if you don't say anything, even if you say that, people will then just to find what? Relief, to make it go away. And tracking body sensations can also be like that. It can be used to just make things go away, or it can be used to open things up to uncover what led to the closure, or it can be used to support the suffering, the fear, or it can be used to support the great opening, love, right? So what seems to happen is that when people track body sensations, when you track body sensations, it down regulates the body. It makes the body quieter, calmer, right? I use it all the time when I don't know what I'm going through. And but when there is a terror or love, it's an experience in the body, right? But it's a pattern in the sensations in the body. So often I give an example of a pointillistic painting, of a woman with an umbrella on the bank of the river Seine in Paris. It's made up of all these dots and tiny strokes. That if you go very close to the painting, you cannot see the woman with an umbrella and the child. The emotion is the woman with an umbrella child. It's easier to see than actually to look at all the dots that the child is made up of, in which case it's a meaningless, right?
Hmm.
So one thing I would say is that to make track emotion, not the sensations that are creating them. That's the difference. So, for example, the simplest thing to do, if you don't have an emotion, I would say, notice how bad it feels that she left you. That's it. They say, I constricted you. I don't want to hear that. I just want you to tell me whether it feels bad. So you challenge the brain to look for the face in the cloud, so to speak. That is what we keep track of, and then expand that it feels bad that she left you, rather than, oh, it's tingling here, it's painful here. That's, you're going down to the level of those dots. So that's one thing that, I've written an article on it. It's on my website, that I would caution people against, because many people in the Bay Area, for example, they're doing, they do mindfulness-based stress reduction of Vipassana, etc. These are wonderful systems of much psychological and spiritual benefit, right? But at the same time, the tracking of body sensations, tinier and tinier sensations, can become a defense against the very growth that they are. It can slow things down. So
and there's something about the more global, where do you feel bad, that allows it to move.
yeah.
Open.
It also grabs a lot more stuff
Right.
than
And the
looking
little
at the,
dots
yeah,
and the little dots.
exactly.
That's
And it's
very
simple.
helpful. It's
Yeah.
very helpful. And it's unique to you, I believe. It's come out of your work with people over the years.
Yeah, especially because I teach. I know how I'm a I've learned
You're an SE.
Vipassana,
Yeah.
and I've learned seen people suffer from long-term use of it. Uh, I've also seen people grow, and so we only see people who are around who haven't been helped by it. That's the one thing. So we cannot go from that to say that it doesn't help anybody.
No, and
But
the right tool at the right time, right? You have to kind of know where to go.
Yeah.
That
So
feels,
that's one thing I would caution against. So
thank you. It feels like a good place to stop. I really appreciate
you're welcome. You're welcome.
everything that you discussed here today. And how can people reach you? What is your website?
Oh, we can go to www.integralsomaticspsychology.com. One word, integralsomaticspsychology.com. And you can reach me through that website. Yeah.
And right now you're doing a lot of Zoom trainings, and I'm hoping you'll do in-person trainings again, and I'll come take one somewhere.
2022, I think, will be the
Perhaps.
earliest. I think,
Yeah.
it looks like it because we have good vaccines and with 95% efficacy. It's only a matter of getting enough vaccines to people. So I think by the end of the year 2022, we'll have good control over the of the pandemic. So it has taught us enough.
Yes, I look forward to coming to one of your in-person trainings in the future. So
wonderful.
Thank you so much. And I'll just end our Zoom. And well, maybe I'll just stop the recording. Hold on.
Yeah, going to do that.
Here we go.